Before we start, I want to encourage you to have a set of the sermon notes. If you don't already have them, just go to the link below. You'll be able to print a set of the sermon notes from that link. Also want to encourage you to have some communion elements. You'll want to have some bread or a cracker. You'll want to have some juice or wine. And if you don't have juice or wine, probably anything to drink would work. But you'll want to have those communion elements because here in about 20 minutes, when we get to the end of the sermon, we'll move right into a time of communion. So if you need any of those things, I would encourage you to pause the video right now. Get whatever you need. Once everything is ready, then go ahead and resume the playback. So I have a question for you. I want you to think of something that you don't like having to wait on. I'm sure that you can think of a thing or two or 20 that you don't like having to wait on. I asked that question this morning at Eastmont, and the first response that I got was someone said, traffic lights. And I said, yep, I'm with you. I don't like having to wait on traffic lights. The second person that responded said, my paycheck. And everybody laughed. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, aren't all of you folks retired? So you don't like having to wait on your paycheck that you don't collect anymore? I was a little confused about that one. But then the third response was food. And I said, yes, I am with you. When I have to wait on my food, sometimes I get a little bit hangry. In fact, I told the person that is a perfect segue into the story that I was planning to tell at the start of the message today. Because this happened to me, and I have to tell you, I'm not proud of this. This is not a story that reflects well on myself, but this is something that actually happened just a few days ago. So I was going to order from a restaurant where I love their food, but their service can leave me a little bit frustrated at times. And I'm not going to tell you the name of that restaurant, Popeyes. And so I ordered through the app. And I ordered the new fish sandwich that they have for the season of Lent. So ordered through the app, got to the drive-through, and got to the place where you place your order. And I said, yeah, I placed an order through the app. And they said, okay, we'll drive on up to the window. So I drove on up to the window. And it was at the window that the person told me, yeah, we're out of the fish sandwich. And I said, okay, well, shouldn't that have been reflected when I tried to order that through the app? And they said, yeah, the app doesn't talk to our store. And I said, okay, well, it seems like the fairly logical thing for the app to do. So what are we going to do here? And they said, well, how about you take this substitution? They offered me a substitution. I wasn't real happy about it, but I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, all right, we'll just pull around, park over there, and we'll bring it out to you as soon as it's ready. So I'm not thrilled about how this has all gotten started, but I go ahead and I pull around, and I parked exactly where they told me to park. And now I am waiting and watching for my food to be prepared, for it to be brought out to me at my vehicle, just like they said. And I sat there and I watched. As there were already a couple of vehicles that were parked there as well. I watched as employees from the restaurant brought the food to these other vehicles. These vehicles drove away. I watched as other vehicles then pulled up to the window. Some of them drove off. Some of them also got parked just like I was. So these other vehicles, I watched them park near me, and I watched and waited and watched then as employees brought food out to these other cars that parked after me. And those vehicles drove away. And I continued to watch, and I continued to wait, and I am, again, not proud of the fact that I'm getting hangrier by the moment. And at this point, I'm staring daggers at the person who's in the drive-through window, because I know that she can see me there. I can see her, but nothing's happening. Now, if you're wondering how much time has passed by this point, it was finally after I had sat there, and I'm not exaggerating, I thought, okay, I'm going to wait until 25 minutes have passed, and then I'm going to lose my patience and walk into the restaurant and say, hey, where's my food? And so I did. I waited 25 minutes. I walked into the restaurant, and as soon as I walk into the restaurant, I can see these shelves where I can clearly see my bag of food. I can see my name on the bag. not only can I see this, but it was the only bag on the entire shelf. And there were employees standing around. While again, I was out there parked for the last 25 minutes. Who knows how long my food had been sitting there on the shelf with my name on it. So I said, "Is that my food?" And they said, "Oh yeah." And they handed it to me. And I said, "Well, how long was it sitting there?" And they kind of shrugged and went, "Not long." And so I was pretty unhappy at this point, but I held my tongue. And so I walked out to my car and I got ready to drive off, but then I thought, you know what, I better just check and make sure that my order is right. I checked and the order was wrong. And so then, I mean, there was nobody else at the restaurant at this particular moment. So rather than walking back to the restaurant, this time I just drove through the drive-thru and drove right up to the window. And I said, "The food is wrong. Could you please make it right?" And this time they didn't park me, to their credit. And this time it took them just a matter of a couple of minutes to make it right. They brought the order to me. And at this point, my impatience was maxed out, and I said, "By the way, what's the name of the head manager of this restaurant?" And they told me the name of the head manager of the restaurant, and I said, "And what's the name of like the district manager for all of the restaurants in this area?" They told me the name of the district manager in that area. But again, not particularly apologetic. It didn't seem like they felt particularly bad. And so I want you to know, for whatever it's worth, as frustrated and as unhappy and as hangry as I was at that point, I didn't end up calling the restaurant manager. I didn't end up calling the district manager. I didn't end up going right to the top and calling Popeye the Sailor Man himself, and I didn't tell him, "Hey, why don't you down a can of spinach and come on out here and make sure that you get these restaurants whipped into shape." I didn't do any of those things. But it is a perfect example of the fact that I don't like to wait, and probably one of the things for which I have the least patience is waiting for food at so-called fast food restaurants. And the reason that I'm telling you that ridiculous story is because in the passage that we're about to take a look at, the Lenten lectionary psalm for this coming Sunday, it just so happens that David is going to tell us something that we should always be willing to wait for, or maybe someone for whom we should always be willing to wait. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at the Lenten lectionary psalm. It is the 27th psalm, and it is the passage in its entirety. And the font is tiny. So, this is the 27th psalm. Of David, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn away your servant in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject or forsake me, God my Savior. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. May God bless the reading of the powerful and the inspiring word. So, this psalm is attributed to David, as we saw in the title line, and it certainly sounds like something that David would have written perhaps later in his life. A number of the commentaries that I looked at this past week said that this certainly appears to have been written when David was in his monarchy and was probably had a few years under his belt, if not a few decades under his belt, of being the king of Israel. So let's do what we always do. Let's talk through the passage. There's a few recurring themes in this passage that I think will start to jump out at us when we review this passage. After we talk through the passage, then what I want to do is I want to focus on three important truths that this passage reveals to us about our relationship with God. So, at the start of the passage, David is talking about his relationship with God, and David says that God is his light, is his salvation, and he has no one to fear. God is his stronghold, and he's not afraid of anyone. And then we get to the second stanza, starting with verse 2, and David says, even when there are people advancing against me, when my enemies and my foes are approaching, though an army might be besieging me, David says, I'm not afraid. Even when wars break out against me, he says, I am fully confident. And then David shifts gears a little bit when we get to the third stanza. We get to verse 4, and David says, this one thing I seek from the Lord. He says, all I want is to be able to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of God, to seek God in the temple. And then David says, look, the reason that that's all I want is because I know that I'm safe there. He says, God will keep me safe in his dwelling. God will hide me in the shelter of the sacred tent. God will set me high on a rock. David says, then, in this middle stanza in verse 6, he says, then my head will be exalted above my enemies. He says, I will make music, I will shout with joy to God. And then David, when we get to this fourth stanza, starting with verse 7, or rather I think that's the fifth stanza, starting with verse 7, David says, so God, hear my voice when I call out to you. Be merciful and answer me. David says, don't hide your face from me. Don't turn away in anger. And look, one of the things that we know about David is that over the course of his life, he made a lot of terrible mistakes. And David seems to be conscious of that as well. He says, look, please don't turn away from me. Don't hide your face from me. Don't reject me. Don't forsake me. He says, please receive me. And then he seems to be saying, look, I may be an older man at this point, but I can still learn. David says in verse 11, teach me your way. Lead me in a straight path. He says, keep me guarded from my oppressors. Don't turn me over to my foes. David says, I have false witnesses that rise up against me. They spout malicious accusations. And then, after David says all of this, I think perhaps the two most powerful verses in this entire psalm are at the very end. In verses 13 and 14, the final stanza, what would that be? The sixth stanza? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the sixth stanza, the final stanza, verses 13 and 14, David says, this is what I remain confident of. I will see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I'm going to come back. We're going to talk more about that here in just a few minutes. And David then concludes the whole thing by saying, wait for the Lord. Be strong, take heart, and wait for the Lord. So what are the things that we can take away from this psalm? What are the lessons that this psalm has for us about our relationship with God? David had a very personal relationship with God. And I would think that most of us today would say that as people of faith, we try to have that personal relationship with God as well. What are the lessons we can take away in this very personal psalm that David has written? I think the first lesson or the first truth is this: with God, we are safe. With God, we are safe. One of the things that we have to remind ourselves is that David lived in a very dangerous time. And one of the things that was certainly true for the Hebrew people back then is that they were constantly in conflict with rival nations, with rival people groups who were always at odds with them. And we know that the Israelites were constantly at war with the Philistines and the Amorites, and the list goes on. And David was a wartime king. And so he had to deal with the external foes, but even as a king, David also dealt with a great deal of political intrigue as well. We know just from reading the Old Testament that David had strife within the kingdom. David had strife within his own family. And so David was constantly dealing with this churn and with this oppression. And David's saying, I've got people that are lying about me. And so David was saying, God, help me. I don't feel safe with these external foes. I don't feel safe with these internal foes. And one of the things that I certainly realize as I read this is that over the 54 years of my life, that I've probably been pretty fortunate, that I have probably been pretty sheltered to never have to deal with all of these conflicts that David had to deal with. Now, you may be watching and you may be thinking, well, Pastor Kerry, I've had to deal with a lot of conflict over the course of my life. And please know that if that is the case for you, that my heart goes out to you, truly. With God, I hope you know that you're safe. I'm grateful for the fact that over the last 54 years, God has kept me safe, because heaven knows that I've put myself in some pretty stupid situations, and God has chosen to protect me, has chosen to keep me safe. And David says that he is safe with God. I hope that all of us, as people of faith, realize that we are safe with God. That is the first lesson this passage has for us. The second is this: with God, we are heard. With God, we are heard. In this passage, David says, I will sing and make music to the Lord. I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. And David says, so God, hear my voice when I call and answer me. David goes on to say, please don't turn your face from me. Don't reject or forsake me. Please receive me. And all of these are different ways of David saying, God, please hear me. Because one of the fundamental truths about all of us as human beings is that we want to be heard. All of us want to be heard. We want to be understood. And I think a lot of us at points in our lives have felt like I'm not being heard and or I'm not being understood. And when you read the Psalms, you know that there are times in David's life when he felt like he wasn't being heard, when he wasn't being understood. And what David is saying is, even when people don't hear me, when people don't understand me, God, I know that you hear me. And in this passage, one of the things that David also expresses is he says, look, don't hide your face from me, don't reject me, don't forsake me. And one of the things that sometimes we can do with each other when we are unhappy with each other is we can give each other the silent treatment. Sometimes we can ignore each other. And David is saying in this passage, people do that to me, God, but I know that you won't do that. And so even when people are treating us unkindly, maybe giving us the silent treatment, maybe ignoring us, or just not hearing us, not understanding us, God hears us, God understands us. And that is a beautiful thing. That is the second truth this passage has for us. The third truth the passage has for us is this: with God, we will be rewarded. With God, we will be rewarded. So at the very end of the passage, David says, I remain confident of this. He's talked about how with God, he feels safe. He's talked about the fact that he's constantly dealing with oppression and enemies, but he says at the end, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And sometimes when we think about this idea that we are going to be rewarded, we tend to focus on our eternal reward, the one that is waiting for us in heaven. And that is certainly the most compelling reward that all of us as people of faith have to look forward to. But we also have to remind ourselves that God is going to reward us for our faithfulness in this life as well. David says it right here in this passage. He says, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. David's saying, I'm going to be rewarded in the here and now. And so hopefully, friends, you and I will look for the places in which God is rewarding us. One of the things that I think you and I tend to do, I know that I tend to do, is I tend to take a lot of the things that God has blessed me with, and I take them for granted. And so a question that I should probably ask myself, that you should probably ask yourself, is this: what are the blessings? What are the rewards in my life right now that I am taking for granted? Hopefully, we will recognize those as the rewards that God has given us. In John 10:10, Jesus said that he came so that we would have life and that we would have it to the fullest. In this life, not talking about eternity, in this life. And in closing, something I want to encourage you to prayerfully consider is this: are you waiting on God for something right now? And if so, how are you doing with having to wait? Because at the very end of the passage, David says to us, wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Is there something that you've been asking God to help you with? Is there something you've been asking God for that you're waiting for right now? And if so, how are you doing with the wait? I told you at the very start of this that sometimes I'm not very good at waiting. Sometimes I can lose my patience. My hope is that whatever you are awaiting, that you are awaiting with patience, you're waiting on God's timing. And friends, we know, of course, that when Jesus came to the end of his earthly ministry, when Jesus knew that the time was right, that he willingly went to the cross. And every time we gather around the Lord's table, we celebrate what was accomplished at the cross. And so as we prepare for our time of communion together, I would just remind you of Jesus' words on the night of that Passover meal. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." And so right now, I would encourage you to get your communion elements. I'm going to go ahead and grab mine. And I'm going to invite you to partake with me at this time. The body of Christ, broken for us, we partake in remembrance of him. And the blood of Christ, shed for us, we drink in remembrance of him. Let us pray. God, we want to follow David's words of advice. God, we want to